All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us tonight. My name is Susan Myroff. I'm the Watershed's Program Director for the Pennsylvania Environmental Council, or otherwise known as PEC. PEC is a statewide nonprofit environmental organization. We have offices in Pittsburgh, up in State College, in Luzerne, in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I work out of our Philadelphia office. We are really thrilled to be here tonight. Our motto is conservation through cooperation, and in that vein, we are one of the co-hosts tonight. I'm really happy to welcome you to this very special webinar, Caring for the Earth: How to Install and Finance Green Infrastructure. This is actually the second installment of our two-part webinar series on actions that faith-based groups can take on their properties to help ensure clean water for their community. And tonight, we're going to hear from three experts about a variety of projects that can be pursued, as well as funding programs and other resources that exist to help your congregation or community group get started on your very own project. So I know you're probably all Zoom experts at this point, but before we begin, I wanted to share a few helpful tips to make sure everyone can enjoy the evening. Please, if you can, change your name so we know who you are. On your photo, you just click on the three little dots in the upper right-hand corner of your picture, and you can select rename. I also invite you to introduce yourself by putting your name and where you are from, I'm sorry, in the chat. There will be time for questions at the end, but you can also use the chat box to input your questions as we go along. If you run into any technical problems, please let us know by using the chat box on the bottom of your screen. You can access closed captioning by clicking the link at the top left hand of your screen. And finally, we are recording the webinar so we can share it more broadly. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that. So first, before we begin our formal presentations, I'd love to introduce David Hayne Menendez, the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light, who will lead us in an opening blessing. David?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you, as well as the mercy and blessings of God. Thank you all for being here for this work, for this commitment to preserve this garden of creation, this gift of home, which has been given to us. I would like to start my opening prayer in my own tradition as a Muslim, as we are commanded in the beginning of all acts to start with a praise of the Creator, and then as most Muslim prayers, I think people are not aware, are more similar to reflections, very similar to the Jewish tradition. So I'll go on with that. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Quoting from the Quran, from Surah 2, line 164, "Behold, in the creation of the heavens and earth, in the alternation of the night and the day, in the sailing of the ships through the ocean for the profit of mankind, in the rain which God sends down from the skies, and the life which God gives therewithin to an earth that is dead, in the beasts of all kinds that God scatters through the earth, in the change of the winds and the clouds which they trail like servants between the sky and the earth. Here indeed are the signs for people who are wise, who are believers." In all of our traditions, it is truly all faiths are replete with commands, with suggestions, with even coddling for the moral imperative that we, as congregations and individuals, must take up the call to actively live as stewards of creation. All faiths teach us the basic idea that we must work together for ourselves, for others, and the planet as a whole. Our faiths guide us, our congregations, our communities, and our nation, which can truly unite together for this greater goal. President Theodore Roosevelt is remembered for many things, but not least of which were his conservation efforts and the foundation of the national park system. And I quote him saying, "Of all the questions which can come before this nation, short of the actual preservation of its existence, there is none which compares in importance with the great central task of leaving this land even better for our descendants than it is for us. A Jewish scholar, Leslie Hazeltine, had a presentation in which she outlined that the Quran itself actually describes our garden of creation, our paradise, 36 times as gardens watered by running streams. I'm from Philadelphia. I grew up near the Wissahickon, the Schuylkill, the Delaware. I currently live in north central Pennsylvania in Lewisburg, which is a riverine town threatened by flooding. But I feel this deeply, the paradisical kind of conceptualization of the benefit of creation being all around us, this potential for peace being drawn from nature. Quoting from the Quran again, truly the pious will be amid gardens and springs. It is said to them, enter in peace, in security, and then God removes whatever bitterness they have in their hearts, so that they enter as siblings, raised aloft on couches. No weariness afflicts them, nor will they be expelled from this paradise. As a person of faith, I believe there to be a direct connection to how people view God and how they treat all of creation. I continuously try to help others see and seek and make those connections for themselves. The scriptures of Christians and Jewish scriptures begin with the creation of the world. This ordering of chaos into water and earth, light and dark, human and non-human creatures, and it is this creation as a collective whole that God deems very good. The early Genesis story, along with countless other passages throughout the scriptures, reveal that God is in a relationship with earth itself. For example, if we see God emerge in a fire, in windstorm, in a burning bush, as light on the top of a mountain, in these instances and in so many others, it is as if the earth is a form of God's expression, like a piece of art that we are surrounded by. We often look at art as part of the artist who made it. We understand a painting isn't the actual artist, but is rather an extension of who they are. An imprint of the artist is in the art they create. That is part of what makes it so beautiful. But I want to suggest that what if we were able to see God in the same way? What if we looked at not only humans, but also the earth and all of creation as made in the image of God, as an extension of the God self? How then would we treat the earth differently? I implore you to take with you what you are going to be hearing tonight, and I hope that you continue the relationship with my organization, with these other organizations, to continue to be brave and live boldly your faith, to strive for a better world. There is not a greater mission than to leave this world better than you entered it, to educate, to create, and to tend to others and all of creation in this miraculous garden. Thank you, and I hope that you can join me in creating a field, a garden watered by streams.
Thank you so much, David. Really honored to have you join us tonight. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers that you will hear tonight. So I want to start with Susan Harris. Susan is the principal at Cerulean. She's spent over 20 years working in watershed restoration and stormwater management. She's worked in both government and private sectors in the greater Philly area. Susan works with clients to assess environmental issues and develop creative and cost-effective solutions. Following Susan tonight, you're going to hear from Robert Gu. Robert is an environmental protection specialist at the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Water in the Office of Wetlands, Oceans, and Watersheds. Robert brings more than 30 years of experience, and his focus is on preserving and restoring watershed hydrology through the use of green stormwater infrastructure and low-impact development policies and practices. Finally, tonight, you'll hear from Natalie Cohen. Natalie is the Senior Coordinator of Conservation Programs for the National Wildlife Federation. With her degree in environmental studies and minor in biology from Salisbury University, she is dedicating her career to the intersection of environmental justice, and urban ecology. We're really thrilled to have these three presenters with us here tonight. And before we begin, I want to thank so many of our co-sponsors. We want to really sincerely thank our wonderful co-hosts at the Tacony-Frankford Watershed Partnership, the Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania, and of course, New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, and all our wonderful co-sponsors that you're seeing here on the screen: the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions, Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, Montgomery County Conservation District, Montgomery County Planning Commission, the National Wildlife Federation, New Jersey Future, New Jersey Highlands Coalition, New Jersey Sustainable Business Council, Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light, the Pennsylvania Jewish Earth Alliance, Camden Community Partners, Raritan Headwaters, South Jersey Landscape Makeover Project, Water Spirit, Newark Dig, and Pinelands Preservation Alliance. Wow, thank you all. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker tonight, Susan Harris.
Thank you, Sue. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to share with you background information on types of green stormwater infrastructure and case studies on completed projects with faith-based landowners. Green stormwater infrastructure features are designed to replicate nature and use plants and soil to filter and infiltrate stormwater runoff. The case studies I will share with you are located in the Jenkintown Creek watershed. The Jenkintown Creek, a tributary to the Tacony, is a small suburban stream located in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, just outside of the Philadelphia city limits. Similar to other neighboring tributaries in the greater Philadelphia area, it is listed as an impaired stream and not meeting its designated use. The creek has altered hydrology and has had sections enclosed or tunnelized over the year as development pressures persisted. Most of the development in the Jenkintown Creek watershed predates current stormwater management regulations. Next slide. One of our most commonly installed green stormwater infrastructure features are rain gardens. Rain gardens can be used to intercept rooftop downspouts, existing pipes, or runoff from impervious driveways and parking lots. A rain garden is a shallow depression which holds rainwater. Drainage from the rain garden can overflow using a spillway or discharge through a riser pipe. At locations where we have compacted and poorly drained soils, we may remove the existing soils and use a soil mixture made of topsoil, compost, and sand, which has better ability to absorb the stormwater. Rain gardens can be planted with a variety of options depending on preference for maintenance and aesthetics. Most often, we are using an assortment of flowering perennials with different blooming periods. For example, irises are early bloomers in May and June, and cone flowers are later bloomers from July to September. By selecting species which bloom at different time periods, we will ensure that there are colorful blooming flowers throughout the growing season. As an alternative, the rain garden could have a very low maintenance native grass that is periodically cut back if a more manicured look is preferred. Next slide. A bioswale can provide capacity while safely conveying drainage towards an inlet, pipe, rain garden, or stream. This feature is often used as a solution where water concentrates and erosion may be prone to occur. As you see in these scenarios, bioswales will commonly use stone down the center flow path and plantings along the side where water may only flow during larger storm events. Unlike rain gardens, bioswales are not designed to impound water. Their primary function is to manage and convey flows. Next slide. In Pennsylvania, there are approximately 2,100 native plant species. Our conventional turfgrass lawn only has a very shallow 2 to 4 inch deep root system. Some native grasses, such as switchgrass, have a more complex root system, which is up to 8 feet deep. These more complex systems will help for stabilization and improve soil health. Turfgrass lawns require more maintenance, lawn treatments, and water than other deeper rooted native alternatives. Converting areas of lawn to meadow or woodland will serve to clean water and reduce the volume and velocity of the runoff. Introducing native plantings will also improve biodiversity and create habitat. Next slide. I'm now going to share some case studies. The Abington Friends have stewarded 120 acres of land along the creek since 1697 and own one of the largest continuous areas of stream frontage in the Jenkintown Creek watershed. Next. The Abington Friends participated in planning and implementation of a rain garden and stream buffer on their property. The rain garden receives flow as indicated with the arrows coming off of the parking lot and heading towards the right side of this plan view. The rain garden allows for the runoff to be slowed down and cleaned before it discharges to the creek. The Jenkintown Creek can be seen with the blue line up in the corner of the plan here. The Tookonee Frankfort Watershed Partnership supported the Abington Friends by writing the grant to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and overseeing installation of this project. Additional funding for the stream buffer came from the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society Tree Vitalize program. Next slide. For this project, we considered the local landscape and we sourced stone that would complement the historic landscape of the property. Rather than using prefabricated end walls and engineered materials, the project used stacked boulders at the end of the pipe and cobblestone in the swale, which blends nicely in a setting. The monthly meeting landscape committee, as well as students from the Friends School, planted and cared for the rain garden. Next slide. Nearly 1,000 feet of stream flows through the Abington Friends property. Between 2014 and 2020, a stream buffer was installed along the creek. Areas of lawn were first drill seeded with a native seed mixture. Students and members of the monthly meeting worked together to plant hundreds of trees and shrubs along the stream corridor. All of the trees were enclosed in fencing or tubes to prevent from deer browse. Graduate students from Villanova have been actively monitoring the project at Abington Friends for over 8 years. Their findings have indicated that the rain garden and stream buffer have reduced the water temperature in the stream from pre to post construction on this project. These decreases can have significant improved habitat conditions for sensitive cold water species. And I just want to point out the two photos in the bottom. You can see when the planting was originally done in 2014 and how mature the plantings look just a few years later. Next slide. The next example I want to share is at the Sisters of St. Basil the Great. The Sisters have owned 100 acres of land since 1926. The project on their property had similar goals of managing water, of managing water that flows off of the parking lot. Rainwater that runs off of the parking lot can pick up oil and grease, which may drip from vehicles, as well as sediment and other particulates. Parking lots also contribute to increased temperature of the runoff. Managing water from driveways and parking lots has been one of the highest priorities when considering placement for green stormwater infrastructure. Next slide. On the property of the Sisters of St. Basil the Great is Manor College and St. Basil Academy. Implementation of this project has provided opportunity for student engagement. The projects are very much about water quality improvements, but also about teaching stewardship, providing a platform for hands-on education, and sparking an interest in outdoor exploration. The students have participated in all aspects of projects, including installation, planting, water quality monitoring, and stream sampling. Next slide. The project at the Reformed Congregation Knesset Israel had a different approach. While the other two examples had large properties and areas of lawn that could be converted, this congregation's property is 4.5 acres and 85% impervious. Opportunities were evaluated to manage runoff from the 1.25 acre building and the 535 car parking lot. A combination of subsurface infiltration basins and vegetated rain gardens were considered as solutions. The goals included intercepting the existing pipes to provide storage, reducing impervious, and providing plantings which cool and filter water from the parking lot. Next slide. The first phase of this project was funded through the Department of Community and Economic Development's Watershed Restoration and Protection Program. The subsurface basin was constructed using these prefabricated crates. The two existing storm pipes from the front and back side of the building were intercepted and directed into the system. The crates are hollow inside and provide significant opportunity for stormwater storage in a small footprint. They also provide the ability to be used under a lawn or a parking lot. The white markers that you see in the picture on the right, sticking up from the feature, is where observation ports are located. This allows accessibility for the feature to be inspected and flushed out should it ever get clogged. After the crates were installed, the features were backfilled with 18 inches of stone and then wrapped with geotextile fabric to prevent any loose soil from entering the system. The feature was then covered with soil, seeded, and restored to lawn. Next slide. The next phase of this project is focused on retrofitting the parking lot. On the right, you can see the parking lot stalls will be shifted in from the property line, restriped, and approximately 10,000 square feet of impervious will be removed for installation of the bioswale and rain garden. Water will drain from the parking lot into the swale, which will be conveyed towards the rain garden. In the center of the parking lot, 2 parking islands will be installed, and these will be planted with small understory trees to help cool the temperature of the macadam. Curb cuts with small stone aprons will be installed at numerous locations along the perimeter to provide a low spot to direct flows into the stormwater feature. This project has received funding from the PA Department of Environmental Protection's Growing Greener grant and is targeted for later this fall for construction. All of the efforts that are made by these landowners and partners provide stormwater solutions which benefit the landowners, but also the community and the health of the watershed. Working with these landowners to implement green stormwater infrastructure projects has significantly benefited the community and improved the health of the watershed. Thank you.
Hey, Suze, thanks so much for that great presentation. I love to hear the fact that we have over 2,000 native plants here in Pennsylvania, and it's amazing when I remember planting at the Abington Friends Riparian Buffer, and it's such an amazing feeling to be able to go back to that site year after year and see, and say, hey, maybe that was one of the trees I planted, and now it's, it's a bigger tree. Hey, so with that, I would like to now introduce Robert Gu from the US EPA. Robert?
Can I have my slides, please? Okay. So I'm going to, this presentation is about cooperation and building bridges. And I think what's critical to remember is that you need to build partnerships to achieve the goals that you're trying to accomplish. And next slide, please. The EPA is promoting green infrastructure because we believe it has many different benefits, and our interest in working with the private landowners is the fact that we have so much impervious surface. We really need everyone to participate in greening the landscape, whether it's municipal governments, private landowners, corporations, academia, etc. And so we felt that we needed to develop some resources to work with the faith community, because the faith community has a huge amount of influence on how people think and how they act. And the faith community also manages and owns huge swaths of property that impact our water bodies. In fact, the Catholic Church is the largest private landowner on the globe. So we are in the process of developing resources to help the faith community think about, design, plan, and implement green infrastructure so that it makes their communities more resilient and livable. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to re-emphasize, we've been partnering with National Wildlife Federation, various other institutions, Interfaith, Power and Light, and that each of these organizations brings a lot to the table, and we can't really do it without the cooperation and integration of all these different programs and minds and souls. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you about a document that we wrote called Saving the Rain, which is about how to implement green stormwater solutions on your faith-based property or your place of worship. And the link to the guide is in this slide. And the guide provides a stepwise process to think about, plan and design and implement projects and from many different angles, from pitching the idea to the congregation to figuring out who to partner with and how to finance the project. Next slide, please. So greening your congregation is more than just putting in a rain garden. It can mean many different things. It can mean greening your building envelope, your structure, your temple, your synagogue, your church, but it also can mean greening your landscape. And so this guide is focused on how do you green your landscape? How do you use green infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure to improve water quality, provide wildlife habitat, provide a place for respite, improve the resiliency of the landscape to climate change and hazards. Next slide, please. So how can green stormwater infrastructure benefit your congregation? Well, it can, a lot of faiths have creation care in mind. And so how can you pursue that mandate through your scriptures? And how do you make your place of worship the best place it can be from a multifunctional perspective in terms of providing a place to congregate, to think, to meditate, and also contribute to the larger community, that is, reduce the environmental impact of the development of the parking lot, of the structures, the roofs, any runoff that may come off the site. And there are benefits to doing so, and the guide goes into those benefits in terms of saving money, reducing your carbon footprint, et cetera. That is making your contribution to providing a better environment. Next slide, please. This slide just talks about the benefits I just went through. How do you improve the climate resiliency of your community? How do you create an opportunity for people to interact together, to volunteer, to learn new skills? How can a green stormwater project enhance the community in terms of public safety and in terms of reducing urban heat island impacts and improving water quality and air quality? Next slide, please. So what are some green stormwater practices? Susan Harris went over some of these: rain gardens, conservation landscape, downspout disconnection. That's an easy one. Route the water over the landscape. You don't have to build anything, just disconnect it. Water harvesting, cisterns, rain barrels, green roofs, permeable pavement. These are all options you can employ on your the side of your place of worship. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go through the process. How do you think about greening your place of worship? How do you develop a project? How do you get started? How do you think about long-term issues, life cycle issues of the project, maintaining it? How do you communicate the benefits of the project, both to the congregation and to the wider community? Next slide, please. This is just a more detailed look at some of the examples in the guidebook, in the handbook, and how these plan elements are broken down into more detail. Next slide, please. Step one, how do you get started? Educating the congregation is critical. Sometimes we'll have a nucleus of people who want to green the congregation. Other times it's one person, a leader. How do you get momentum? How do you convince the pastor, the imam, or the rabbi that this is a good thing? How do you decide whether the community can afford it? How do you generate funding for the project? Next slide, please. Who can be your champions? Who can help promote this idea and help implement it? Find the people who are enthusiastic about greening your congregation, whether it's for wildlife benefits, for aesthetics, flowers, meditation areas, or to reduce your environmental footprint. Next slide, please. then figure out who can help you. Who are your partners? Is it Interfaith Power and Light? Is it the Sacred Grounds Program? Is it the municipal government? Often the municipal governments have resources and technical expertise that they have a vested interest in helping your faith organization succeed, because then you're reducing the overall environmental footprint of the landscape that they have to manage. There are lots of potential partners, and the guide helps you try to identify some of those partners. Next slide, please. Planning is critical to the project. You got to think about what opportunities do we have on our property to implement green infrastructure practices. Are we replacing our parking lot? Are we adding an addition to the building structure? Are there unused areas that aren't performing well for the community? How do you think about designing and building it? What's really feasible? Can you do it in steps? Can you start small? Can you have a small pilot project? Those are the kinds of considerations you need to think about as you go through this process. Can you afford help? Is there volunteer help, or are there partnering organizations that can bring their expertise to bear on your project? Next slide, please. This is really critical. How do you think about the site? What makes sense? Do you want to redo the entire site, or do you want to focus on one area and sort of prime the pump and demonstrate that this is a benefit to the congregation? Are some certain areas suitable or unsuitable for, say, a rain garden, where they wouldn't perhaps drain, or there's very steep slopes and it would be much more expensive to implement a practice on that site? Just considerations. Next slide, please. And then I sort of mentioned this earlier. A lot of faith organizations are expanding their facilities, or they're creating new facilities. What opportunities do you have in those contexts? Can you retrofit your existing designs to function more effectively from an environmental perspective? How can you take out turf and put in rain gardens and native plants and wildlife habitat that is more in line with the values of the congregation? So those are some things you can think about. There's a whole continuum of practices that you could utilize based on your funds, your expertise, and the desire of the community to change the landscape. Next slide, please. Susan? And then one thing I really want to emphasize is you need to ensure long-term success, you need to think about who you need to talk to. The maintenance folks, the landscapers, the financial people in the organizations, because you need to think about long-term operation and maintenance, budgeting, and educating the people who are actually going to maintain the garden, rain garden, or cistern, or whatever practices you elect to utilize. And oftentimes the landscape folks don't really understand the value and the need to selectively maintain a given kind of landscape. And so what we've seen a lot in various situations is the landscape people mow over the rain garden. So you need to tell them, this plant is a weed, this plant is desirable. We don't want, this is a no-mow zone, those kinds of things. Lay it out with visual resources and educate the people who are actually going to do it, whether it's volunteers or paid professionals at the facility. Next slide, please. And then this is really critical as well. You need to engage the congregation. Often what we'd like to see is congregations or temples or mosques adopting these kinds of practices and then demonstrating to the community that they're playing an active role in trying to make the environment better. And hopefully we can instill an informal competition and everyone gets in order and says, we can do this too. We want to demonstrate that we're all collectively working to improve the environment. And these kinds of messages could spill over to private residential properties. If the congregants see that it's something they desire on the faith community site, they may want to go home and do it at home. And so that message could be instilled across, back and forth in bi-directional ways. Next slide, please. The other thing is, next speaker is going to talk a lot about financing, but this slide just sort of goes into potential sources of funding and economic benefits that you may realize by implementing green stormwater infrastructure. That is, reductions in stormwater fees, et cetera, and that there are grant money and rebates from various municipal governments to promote the use of these practices on congregation landscapes. Next slide, please. This is just another slide talking about stormwater fees and how a lot of faith-based organizations are hit by large stormwater fees, and that by implementing green infrastructure, they can reduce their stormwater fees. So that's one way to convince the powers that be to perhaps entertain the thought of putting in such practices because you can reduce your stormwater fees. Next slide, please. And then again, I want to reemphasize, start simple. You don't have to redo your entire site, have an expensive $100,000 project. You can start small, demonstrate the concept, do it incrementally across the site, or you can start big. Depends whether you're building a whole new church or mosque, and you can spec permeable pavements and gutter disconnects from the very get-go, or whether you want to just take it slow and do the things you can do within your existing budget on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. We are actively looking for ideas on products that would benefit the faith community in terms of achieving the goals and going through the process I just outlined. So we're developing some PowerPoints for congregations that are customizable, that say you have a champion at the congregation who's interested in greening the facility. They can take this PowerPoint, put in some site-specific information, faith-specific mandates, and use it to communicate to the congregation and anyone else who they want to partner with in terms of what their goals are and what they want to achieve. And then we would like to also develop a bunch of case studies like the ones we saw earlier to give community congregations examples of projects they might want, or project types or categories or processes they may want to emulate in terms of their own congregations projects. Next slide, please. I just wanted to put this slide in because we do have other activities that are faith-based at EPA. The Council of Environmental Quality is interested in this issue. Energy Star program, how do you make your building envelope more energy efficient and save money and produce fewer greenhouse gases? How do you think about the health of the congregation from a pollutant exposure perspective from our Office of Land and Emergency Management program? Next slide, please. So this is my contact information. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions, and good luck with your projects.
Hey, thanks so much, Robert. Great information. Don't worry, we'll make sure you have the link to the green that guide book is amazing. Just a great product, and EPA is doing lots of great work around this issue. So thank you for sharing that tonight. So last, I'd like to introduce our last speaker. I'm really happy to have you all hear from Natalie Cohen. She's going to be telling us about resources available through the National Wildlife Federation's Sacred Grounds program. So Natalie, take it away. So I think as soon as we get your, there they are. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name's Natalie. As I said earlier, or as Susan introduced me before, I'm the senior coordinator for NWF in our Mid-Atlantic region, and I'm calling in from Baltimore City today. Next slide. So NWF, our Our mission is to unite all Americans to ensure wildlife thrive in a rapidly changing world. Next slide, please. And we're truly a federation. So we have 7 regional centers throughout the country. We have our headquarters in Reston, Virginia, and a national advocacy center in Washington, D.C. My office is in Annapolis, but I haven't been there in a while. As you can see, the Mid-Atlantic is quite a generous definition. And so a majority of our work that I lead or on the ground conservation work is taking place in Baltimore, Philadelphia, Lancaster, and Wilmington, Delaware. Next slide. And a majority of our focus is helping people garden for wildlife where you live, work, play, learn, and worship. Next slide, please. I'm going to kind of roll through these a little bit because Robert and Susan did a really great background on green infrastructure and even native plants. But before I hop into sacred grounds, I really just wanted to emphasize the importance of native plants and that when you're thinking wildlife habitat, as a wildlife group, we're really thinking more about habitat and conservation in connection with green infrastructure and water quality. So at the basis of the Sacred Grounds program are native plants. And so just to touch on that again, a native plant is a plant that has been around for a long time, and it has formed really beautiful symbiotic relationships and co-evolved alongside insects and other wildlife, and they form these really wonderful specialized relationships. And so, for example, the monarch butterfly is an iconic species. The monarch needs milkweed exclusively because they only lay their eggs on the underside of milkweed leaves, and their caterpillars exclusively eat the milkweed foliage. So that's just a really great example of really why we need these plants. And Dr. Doug Tallamy of University of Delaware says to plant for the caterpillars because they are oftentimes caterpillars and other insects that feed on plants like native plants here are the basis of our food system. And so when we're thinking about creating healthier environments, that really starts with stronger food chains, and stronger food chains have create more healthier ecosystems, and healthier ecosystems are more resilient in the face of climate change. Native plants also provide food, shelter, cover, and places to raise young. And so when we think about the connections to conservation, we're in a global species crisis, a climate crisis. There is a global bird decline, and so 96% of terrestrial birds in North America feed their hatchlings exclusively caterpillars. So just another one of those connecting the beautiful, mysterious Mother Earth and everything that she does for us. And so, also plants aren't just good for the birds and the caterpillars, but they have a lot of benefits for humans as well. Access to nature, which is so important in built urbanized environments. They're also really great at beautifying your front porch or your house of worship or your block. And they can really serve as a learning opportunity for creating these stewards of the future. And next slide. So which brings me to Sacred Grounds. So that is, as I said before, it's an NWF program that recognizes congregations, houses of worship, and faith communities to both create wildlife habitat and actively link faith practices and caring for the environment. And this is a photo of a prayer park that was installed on a vacant lot in Toledo, Ohio through the Sacred Grounds program. So just as Robert said, you can start small, 300 square feet, or even less containers. That's okay. That's a great start. Next slide, please. We found several common motivating factors, everything from reducing runoff and flooding on or around your congregation grounds, wanting to lower your stormwater fee, building more resilient communities, providing access to nature and for people to connect with nature, but also as importantly, connect with one another. And really, fulfilling this call to care for creation and connect with your faith practices. Next slide, please. The Sacred Grounds program, it is a designation based, so you can go through and do all the steps you need, and at the end you can certify and you'll get a sign, become an official Sacred Grounds site. And so the three components of the program is creating a native plant garden or wildlife habitat at your house of worship, educating and engaging your congregation, making those connections between your faith and environmental stewardship. And that can look a lot of different ways. It could be your faith leader preaching from the pulpit, or placing an ad or a banner on your congregation website, or hosting a planting day. And then also being trusted community anchors, making sure that you connect these practices to your greater community as well. Next slide. And so if Sacred Grounds sounds like something you are interested in, you want to start with visioning. How do you envision your space? How do you want to activate it? And then once you kind of have some inspiration, you need a team to do it. You always need a team. So form and identify a core team that will be responsible for moving your project forward. And then once you have assembled your green team, it's time to take action. And online, which we'll share resources afterwards, there's all these different ways to engage and take action, and plenty of resources on there online as well. Next slide. So nature-based green infrastructure is the name of the game, name of the webinar tonight. But the idea that small-scale habitats can make a really big difference for both people and wildlife. And so whether that's, a rain garden or just a more basic approach of conservation landscaping, where you're just replacing turf grass with your native plants. Robert mentioned the downspout disconnection, and container gardens. We do a lot of work in Wilmington, and there's not a lot of green space. So we're exploring container options. Next slide, please. And so once again, I ask you, how do you want to activate your space? Because this is so much more than just green infrastructure. It's a place for you to build community. So is it a pollinator garden or a meadow, a nature play space if you have early childhood education or care programs, a container garden, vegetables, the list goes on. Next slide, please. And so just want to leave you with this. I would be remiss if I didn't share. We have a big grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation through their Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund. And we are working in Wilmington, Delaware to create 20 pollinator gardens and certify 20 houses of worship as Sacred Grounds sites. And we're doing so in partnership with Delaware Interfaith Power and Light, Delaware Nature Society, and the Delaware Center for Horticulture. And next slide, please. So contact info is here. That's me up top, Natalie. If you or a loved one live or worship in Wilmington and you think they're interested, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to me, or Shweta Arya is the executive director of Delaware IPL. So either one of us would be happy to get you involved. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie. That was really awesome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Molly Riley. I'm with the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. We are a statewide organization working in New Jersey to elect environmentally responsible candidates to state and local offices. advocate for strong environmental policies, and hold our elected officials accountable. And we're also one of tonight's co-hosts. And so I'm going to be running our Q&A session. So we're opening up to questions. If you haven't already submitted a question to the chat, please feel free to do that. But I'm going to go to some of the ones we were able to grab earlier on. So I think this question is for Susan from Ken Gordon. He was just wondering if you could repeat what government agency helped with the funding for I think the Abington Friends project.
Sure. So at Abington Friends, it was the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We had a Delaware River Restoration Fund grant that is currently open until March 31st, accepting proposals, as well as the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund. The state grants that we used for implementation of the projects included the Department of Community and Economic Development. They have their Watershed Restoration and Protection Program. That's also currently open and accepting proposals until May 31st. And another source of funding was DEP's Growing Greener program. That one's not open currently, but we are expecting it sometime in 2022.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So a couple questions that we've gotten from the chat are a few folks wondering how you can get started with doing a green team or sustainability team. You guys mentioned, talking to your groundskeeping or faith leaders, but what are some of the models and recommendations you have for bringing other people together and trying to identify like-minded folks? Natalie or Susan, I guess would probably be for either of you.
Yeah. So I think, that's definitely you need your team, and whether that's just a team of two, that's a good starting place. But definitely getting your council on board, I think, is really important, especially if you're going to be talking about a larger scale project, and making sure you just have support from your faith leader and your council. Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, so different watershed, but they have an abundance of recommendations and green team trainings and cool vacation Bible school, activities and curriculum. So I would definitely turn to them for resources, and I can pop their link in the chat. But I think hosting a workshop, an educational workshop, could be an interesting starting point. And neighbors, yes, make great partners for sure.
Those are some great recommendations. We actually this is our part 2. Our part 1, we did have Jody from Interfaith Partners of the Chesapeake on, so we can also bump her contact information as well as a link to our first webinar in some of our follow-up materials. So we have a few other questions. We have one asking, could you guys share some examples of different gardens from other churches for congregations? Maybe there's a lot of space, maybe there's no green space or areas they can put in a garden. Do you guys have specific examples you can share?
Yeah, I gotta go again. So they're on nwf.com or .org/sacred grounds. There's videos of several different installations, and we can definitely, in our follow-up resources, send some photos as well of some congregations in Baltimore.
Great.
I'm glad to do the same. And TTF, a lot of the project sites that we shared tonight, there be tours of. So there's both virtual options that you can find online, as well as in-person tours.
Great. Well, thank you. So this is something I frequently encounter when I'm trying to get people to apply for grants. But what are some examples of information that a group would need to prepare for a grant application? What kinds of information should you collect if you're hoping to apply for one of these programs?
I can start with that. So, I think having a lot of partners, and having that match. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a financial match, but most of the grants that we look towards will require maybe 15% as an example, and that can be an in-kind contribution. So it can be all of the congregation members' time towards planning. It can be actual implementation. If you're out with a shovel in the ground and helping to construct the project or plant trees, all of that's matched. So, I would just encourage somebody who is looking to do a project to have some kind of tracking system so that your time. It's very valuable. The independent sector website puts volunteer labor rate at about $28 an hour. And if you're providing professional services pro bono, you can use that professional services rate. So I think just tracking that time towards a project and that ability to show that investment from the congregation, from the community is important to a grant.
And I would add that having partners really enhances your application and improves your competitiveness. If you can show that there are other partners within the community that will provide resources and that want to partner with you on it, that's a huge indication that the project has a higher probability of success.
And I'll also follow up with, make sure you do a site assessment of, make sure what you're proposing to do is actually feasible. Because you can have wonderful grand visions, and then you want to make sure that you're creating the strongest proposal possible. So do a site assessment. Yep.
And the other thing is they look favorably on community involvement. So if you can demonstrate support, both from your pastor, your rabbi, or whoever, and say the sustainability community or the board, or the fact that you have all these volunteers lined up, or some scout group, all those things make a huge difference in terms of your application.
Awesome. That's super helpful to know. We're getting close to time. So one last question, and then I'm going to pass it to Julie. But any tips on how a local watershed organization or community partnership might be able to help congregations, do something like a site assessment or get a green infrastructure project started?
So, I would say there's a lot of interest around green stormwater infrastructure. And I think reaching out to your local watershed organization, conservation organization, the conservation district, all of those partners are there as a resource to help make recommendations and strategize about what might be a best option for implementing green stormwater infrastructure.
I don't know about Delaware and New Jersey, but in Maryland, in Virginia, there are many municipalities that provide assistance. They'll help you through the process and give you rebates and fund the project or part of it.
Great, that's awesome to know. We'll be trying our best to also answer questions via email and follow up with resources. And I'm going to pass it to Julie to wrap us up.
So thank you everyone for joining us. I just want to do a shout out to the folks, the staff folks who behind the scenes, and Molly and Kristen and everybody else who have been managing this technologically so that we could have such a productive conversation. Thank you to our sponsors, again, our staff, the presenters. I think we heard a lot about partnerships. Partnerships are how we get this work done, and we have a lot of shared goals. We are, in terms speaking from a watershed organization, we are just a phone call or an email away. We are looking to do this kind of work, and we are looking for partners to do it with. So don't be, we're here, we're not hard to find, and this is the kind of work that we want to get done. I'm supposed to remind you that we're putting a survey in the chat, correct? And one of the amazing things about, there it is, about working with these partners, is that they are really good at follow-up. So Conservation Voters, New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, and these folks will save this. It's recorded, and we will send an email to you that includes a whole bunch of links. They'll look through the chat, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can, and they'll share all our information. So it'll be useful follow-up, and please, feel free to contact anybody, the organizers, because that's what we want to stay in touch and get good things done. So thank you, everybody. I guess I'm saying goodbye, and that's it. Please go home and have something to eat, and hang out with your pets, your family, your friends.
Good night.